and Compliance Committee meeting. I'm going to open the cutter here. Can I just double check? I don't usually. No, you don't. Thank you very much. Awesome.
Whakataka ho ki te uru, whakataka ki te tai, ki te tonga. Kia makina kina, kia uta, kia ma taratara ki tai. E he aki ana o te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhunga, he hei Maori ora.
Welcome to our elected members and staff that are here this afternoon. I have apologies from His Worship the Mayor, Deputy Mayor and Court, Councillor John Busich. I think that's everyone. Thank you. Can I please have a mover for those apologies? Thank you, Councillor Collard, and that was a close one, Councillor Smith. And I just want to acknowledge member Adele Gardner. Please just send us a chat if you want to chime in on any of the items, so I don't forget about you. Thank you, Adele.
Was David included in those apologies? I see he's on the leadership list.
I did not receive any apologies from Councillor Clinton. No, I didn't either. Can I just double check? Yeah, he normally is on this committee, but we know that he's gone off to another commitment. But do we want to include his apologies? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we'll include Councillor Clinton, who's obviously forgotten about us. Thank you. Confirmation of previous minutes.
I'll move.
Thank you, Adele. Second. Thank you, Councillor Smith. And as we move through the minutes, can I just acknowledge the work that staff have taken to include Te Reo Māori throughout our agenda. I was really excited when I was reading, when I had my first look at it. And Councillor Tepania for his work on that. Anybody want to move the minutes?
Moved and seconded by Adele.
I'm sorry.
Point of clarification,
That's right.
Chair. I just seconded that and then realised that I wasn't in attendance of that meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Collard will be the seconder then. And those of us that were here for that meeting, happy to. All those in favour? Aye. Okay, so now we have report 5.1, update on Resource Management Act legislation. And I'll have a mover and a seconder.
I'll move.
Second, Member Ward and Councillor Smith. Thank you. And so the report is to update the committee on the resource management reform process and COVID-19 recovery Fast Track Consenting Act 2020. Dean, was there anything staff wanted to say about this, or shall we?
Madam Chair, I think Trish, who's the author of the report, has, or Rochelle and Trish jointly, Trish has, you have slides on these, Trish? Well, yeah, two presentations, one on this item and the next. If I could just, by way of introduction, highlight a few things.
Sure.
This legislation is quite significant, and we're not sure of timelines, so we can speculate about that. It may be 3 years before we see those real changes come through. But there's quite a bit happening. I just saw earlier today an announcement from government of $3.8 billion that's going into housing. That will be huge in terms of its significance to this district, in terms of additional housing and consenting related to that. So while we work with the existing legislation, the RMA and the requirements of that, the RMA, a changing district plan, current district plan, and a new unfolding to be consulted or being consulted district plan, we see new legislation on the horizon, and it has all kinds of implications along with government announcements about funding, etc. So this is significant. It's significant in terms of change, and what it might mean in terms of how we process consent into the future. So I won't say any more than that, and maybe hand to Trish to talk to a brief presentation.
Trish, would you like to come up to the table here? You can sit down, or we can get you a podium if you prefer.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, councillors, staff. So yes, I'm acting Rochelle, acting Environmental Services Manager. So I understand it's just a brief summary of the report. That I can't claim to be the author of this report. Rochelle did write this. So we're going to resource consents first. So as you can see,
Sorry.
that's okay.
No. Just one moment, Michelle. So where are we going to?
That's it. Is that the right slide?
Repealing?
Or was it one before?
Yep.
Yeah, that's it.
So how familiar is the room to the new legislation that's proposed?
Not very.
Not very.
No.
So, I mean, you could talk to this for a long time. So, I've just given you the headings. There's three coming. There's the Natural and Built Environment Act. They're calling it the NBA. The Strategic Planning Act, which I'm sure Roger will be able to talk about that if you had any relevant questions, and Climate Change Adaptation Act, the CAA, to address complex issues. So there are three different, sort of splitting up the RMA, if you like, and bringing in, taking out some of the consenting from the strategic stuff, and then the climate change is brand new legislation. So the climate change one is meant to be later in the year, like October. So the district plan team hoping to get their plan notified before that act comes in place, so they're going to have to make changes to their brand new draft district plan. So the Natural Built Environment Act, if you look at the report on page 2, and it's just basically about improving the natural environment, enabling more development within environmental limits, providing an effective role for Maori in improving housing supply and affordability. This is the aspiration of the bill. Whether it meets those aspirations is what we're all for us to find out, I guess. Then the second one is the COVID Fast Track Consenting Act, which we've had a couple of applications come through us using that act, which below you can see there's a Matangi storage reservoir and then public final development of Haitaya. So basically what's been happening is applications are coming in and they're applying under the COVID Fast Track Consenting Act, but at first they don't know if they'll be accepted by Parliament or accepted by MFE. So we have to work on it until we know it's been taken over. So sometimes we're running dual processes running.
How long is that from when you're seeing lodging to when you know?
There's one dam that we still don't know. So it's on section 92, so we're not doing anything on it at the moment. So it's not very fast at the moment. It's not fast. And then the climate change, the third change, Climate Change Act, I think that's here. That's basically the Adaptation Act it's talking about a managed retreat, and were you all here at the
Yes.
hazard workshop?
Yeah.
So I don't need to talk to that one.
Yeah.
So much.
Cool. Okay. Well, was there any other slides on this report? I don't think so.
Okay.
Oh,
That one.
I think there may be one more slide. No?
No, yeah.
No,
So are there any questions? Like, I know some of you might have
Councillor Smith has a question.
Thank you for that. It's good to get this update. This is the question that I think I've asked every time that we've talked about the proposed changes is about resourcing. I don't know whether you can answer that or perhaps this is a question to you is, are we starting to get a look at what those resourcing requirements might start to look like? We've been caught short in the past, so how can we sort of get abreast of that? I think it's really important for elected members especially to understand what the implications are of these proposed changes from an operational point of view. So just wondering if you've got any understanding of that.
Through you, Madam Chair, absolutely. We are very mindful of the potential scale of the changes or impacts of the changes and volumes of consents that might come through as a result of that. So we want to gear up for that in a way where we have flexibility. The conversation we had in the Chief Executive is about resources, and I know that's been touched on in different forums where elected members are mindful of resourcing implications. But the challenge for us is to look at all of the options, including consultant planners, which we use currently, and options along those lines. That said, they'll be seeing the same pressures, and their availability may be an issue for us. Engineering input is the big issue for us, and we touched on that in the committee this morning. Engineering input with vehicle crossings, for example, we're getting input via a workman who's contracted. Other engineering input does have a bearing on whether we can get consents out of the door in 20 days or not and meet statutory timeframes. So that is a key area for us, as is the absence of a reserves planner, for example, right now as we speak. And that's a problem right now for us. And that's not a role that sits in my group, but we do take advice and input from, and currently it sits in the strategic planning and policy group, the role. I believe it's still vacant, and that in itself creates an issue for us. So I'm being long-winded in my answer, but I think it's important to recognise that we have constraints currently, and we are addressing those, and we are, with one eye on the future and in terms of what's coming, we really are gearing up and starting to plan for what that might look like and how we would cope.
Thank you for that, Dean. I guess it feeds into the mahi that we've been doing around Mayor's Task Force for Jobs and building those relationships and what that succession and business continuity looks like for us. So I guess it's not necessarily a question, more of a comment. I know that this is becoming an issue right across the country, and we are seeing more and more days such as our Girls in Infrastructure Day, which is on Tuesday next week, I believe, where there are a bunch of engineering firms and bringing Year 13 students together to try and look at how they can bond them to the region in these spaces. So I guess it's planting a seed. I'm hopeful that we are participating in that space just to look at how we can encourage our young people to bring the expertise back here or keep the expertise in general.
Madam Chair, I think Trish wants to add something.
Through the Chair, I also would just like to comment that in addition to the new legislation that's coming and what changes that might bring, it's actually more of a potential resourcing issue, the draft district plan once it becomes proposed. So we had a presentation from Barker's last week who walked through us the experience of the Whangarei District Council, and they recently went through having a proposed and a non-proposed plan through, and the waiting that we've got to do. So consenting can take twice as long, and bills will go up double, and this is potentially, of course, and planners will have to take on less consents. That's what Whangarei did to make sure they met statutory timeframes, which means a greater use of consultants.
Sorry, may I very briefly add, fees is something that we are discussing with Sherwood Government at the moment, and whether there's an opportunity to look at fees in this next round for the new annual plan. It is something that was suggested, and I think we, at this stage, agree, or council has agreed to a 2.2 across the board increase in the fees. We do have an issue in that our fees, our resource consent fees, are amongst the lowest in the country, and we need to make some adjustments sooner rather than later. So that's another issue for another forum, but I would flag that as something that we also have to look at.
Very interesting.
Department of Internal Affairs chaired under Warren Ulasili on a pre-select committee consultation on the RMA reform, legislation reform. We've made it clear to that body that it's been rushed together quite quickly, that we are not representing the sector because the sector hasn't been asked about us. They've just picked a dozen of us to share their ideas with and see what kind of reactions might come out of the sector. That's a different thing than having a formal representation responsibility. So we've had our first meeting. I think that's the only bits I'd add here. There's an architectural change to the entire national pitch for resource management, which is being talked about, and it would look more like the NZTA system, that it would current Crown statutes that our own council is the regulator for locally. It's more likely to be a sort of national policy statement and a regional regulator and then a lot of local executors. So that's got to inform around it yet. The other things that popped up in the first conversation that are a little distressing to me are just about the enthusiasm to avoid having elected members on that regional regulator panel. I put the argument for us that if you wanted our people, which they did, to be represented, what other way would you do it but by the people's elected representatives? There was also an issue around Maori engagement in this process as kaitiaki, because there's a natural marriage between the way Maori works with the environment on a sustainability, on a practical basis, but on a sustainability first basis. And the resourcing that's not available to our local iwi to participate in so many of the things we do with them. And could we think about that being accommodated in the new setup? So there's more to come on this in another meeting up with them and my own staff. If you get the advice from me as we go into the next one, I'm keen to hear what you're thinking. That's awesome.
Madam Chair, it would be really good to get some of the...
Councillor Collard was waiting to speak.
No problem. Just a comment on one of the things I've stated here in terms of having some of the lowest resource consenting fees in the nation. I really don't think that there is an issue or a problem being the market leader in low fees, unless of course we are under charging, because I think that fees are a huge draw on our people up here, and if we want development, we really need to be on top of that. But I would prefer to see us maintain that status of the lowest fees in the country, because it would be something that we can promote.
Thank you, Councillor Collard. I think that Trish had an answer.
Yeah, I can speak to that through the chair to Councillor Collard. The thing is, there's the cost of processing has to be borne by the applicant, so there's no actual, whether the fees are the lowest or the highest in the country is irrelevant. The person gets the bill. So what's happening when we're the lowest is that they have a perception that it might cost them. For example, an applicant puts in a 133 lot subdivision development and they only put in a fee of $1,850. So we're spending tens of thousands of dollars working on an application, and we've only got $1,850 in the kitty. So that's okay for the bigger people. For the smaller people, they also think that if they pay $3,000 for an RMA con, which means a combined land use and a subdivision, they think that's the cost, and they're horrified when the bill is higher. So if you bring the fees up just a little bit to match what actually costs to process it, then there's less objections at the invoice end. So it just helps, actually. It's helpful I believe it's helpful to the customers.
Madam Chair, if I may, just on that, it's public-private good. There's a whole discussion here about those who are in the business of subdividing and doing development in that business to make money. That's really what they're there for. And there is an argument for economic development and what council does with regard to supporting economic development on the one hand, but then in not charging certain fees and covering costs, we are spreading that burden to all ratepayers, because that's the mix. It's funded by the ratepayer as opposed to the person who benefits through a subdivision and on sale of property. So I think we just need to be careful with how we balance that up.
Yeah, true.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I just wanted to perhaps flag that it would be really beneficial to get some governance oversight on some of the risk to affordability that we're facing through all of these reforms and things. We have our affordability reporting that goes to our committee on a 6-monthly basis. I believe we're due for one in the next couple of cycles. So to really be looking at what those costs are, I think is really important for governance to have an understanding of, so that when we are advocating through our governance roles in these processes, we are aware of what the costs are going to be potentially to our ratepayers. If we're not aware of those, then we can't advocate for those and we can't form substantial debate. So it would be great to get some understanding through our ARF committee on that.
I hope that somebody's capturing that for assurance, risk and finance. Thank you, Jamie. Awesome. And I totally call what you said, Councillor Smith, in regard to the risk, and I'm looking to add something to our work plan for perhaps later in the year on the proposed district plan and the ramifications for regulatory and consent, the consents department, and how you're looking to address the potential risk in that department. Thank you. And just want to, did you have one more? Sorry. And I just want to acknowledge our local Kevin Prime that is on the resource management review panel. He's been on the Northland Conservation Board and Foundation North and a number of other local organisations, and is of course Ngāti Hine. And so yeah, it's great to see a local name on this review panel. So there will be a rural and Northland flavour in there, hopefully. And are there any other questions? Adele, did you have any questions about this paper, or we're moving on to the next one?
No.
Okay. Thank you. So all those did I say that? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Thank you. Okay, Rochelle, we've got next Trish, 5.2 Regulatory Compliance Committee update, and the recommendation is that the Regulatory Compliance Committee receive the report Regulatory Compliance Committee update, resource consents. Can I have a mover? Yeah. Councillor Smith and Member Ward. Thank you very much. All yours, Trish.
Are we going back to this?
One moment.
Yeah.
So you'd be all quite familiar with this report now. Rochelle's seen it a few times. So really it's just the update for February, which saw a slight drop in compliance, down from 100% that was in January. That's because of we're still getting legacy ones coming through. So that means, actually only 2 of them are legacy, and we do have delays with the NTA process. Sometimes it takes, they're just swamped and we have to get in the queue.
Can I just clarify what is a legacy?
Older ones.
Oh, great.
So generally all the new ones that we're receiving, we're processing in statutory timeframes. We still have quite a number of older ones that are 6 months to a year, and they're already breached timeframes, so we can't pull them back. So we just have to try and limit the damage as much as we can as they come through. So we have had a lot of 100% weeks, so we hope that you don't look to see this not as a decline in our efforts, but more of a just the way it works with resource consents. So yeah, but if you move on, I haven't got another slide on the screen, but there is in the report you'll see that it talks about resource consents lodged per month. Have you all got that in the agenda?
Yeah.
So you'll see in February we're still receiving a lot of consents. It's really high, and as you can see by the consents, the one on the PowerPoint still, we're tracking upwards all the time. So we've got a huge volume of consents coming in, and it's pretty great effort really, I think, from the team to get the amount of work done in the statutory timeframes that they're doing. Yeah, I don't necessarily talk to the wards because that's something that the wards want to see, but I see it's in there, so that's interesting. And Section 37s, we use Section 37 whenever we can. Are you familiar with what it means? So it's usually for complexity. So if it's a non-compliant subdivision application, for example, and we think it's going to take us longer, we can double the time frame. We can extend the time frame longer than double if the applicant agrees. And then Section 88s have gone up because we speed up. And that's one of the things that's really interesting with the Barker's presentation to us, that as soon as we get if we get an application that doesn't cover the proposed plan, and when it has some weight and it's proposed, and the current plan, we can reject it immediately, and that saves us, everyone, a lot of time till they come back in and address both plans. Yeah, so that's February for you. March is looking very busy.
Yeah. Just coming back to the Section 88, I saw a few facials around the room. Can you give an example of when, an everyday type example of when an application might be rejected?
Okay, a really good example of that is a Form 4 or a Section 7 under the Building Act letter is received by an applicant for a building consent, and it tells them the PIM officers have done a check and they've found out it needs a resource consent. So often part of the building accreditation process, they've tightened up on what the PIM officers can do, so they're not to speak to the applicants about why they've got a Form 4 letter, so they just get this letter telling them they need a resource consent. They often have absolutely no idea, they don't know who to go to, who to talk to, and so sometimes they just simply fill in the application form for a resource consent, attach the Form 4 letter and say, here's our resource consent. So
It's not an application.
No. So we, under the Schedule 4 of the RMA, it outlines all the information that's required to be submitted when you when you submit an application. And obviously for a restricted control and restricted discretionary, we aren't tough because oftentimes they don't need to do a full analysis of the policies and objectives and whatnot. But as soon as it becomes discretionary and non-compliant, we really need to have all of the information. And where it's backfired for us badly, and we've not rejected when we should have rejected, is when the fee objections come in, because we're having to do all the work for the applicant, because we can't send it to the delegated authority minus all that information.
Yeah.
We have to do that work. They get a big bill and they're horrified.
So there could be a lot of public listening in today. What can we do to make sure that this doesn't happen? What can they do? Is there somebody that they can contact?
But the duty planner.
Okay.
The duty planner service is really helpful. And most times they do. It's just occasionally someone is unaware of how it works and they just think they have to apply, and an application form means they've applied. Does that make sense? So yeah, they've applied.
And it's not, yeah.
Madam Chair, I'll give you an example of a recent compliment we received. One of our planners was complimented on having helped someone who happens to be a lawyer who was struggling with the resource consent, and the advice that was given, and this was as part of the application process or pre-application, if you like, was just very much appreciated. So I think there's a place for a duty planner. There's equally a place for advising and for people to ask for a pre-application meeting if that's what they would like. And that advice can save a lot of time and heartache. I think it saves time for the applicant. It also saves time for our team who are considering these applications. So we're promoting that all the time.
Thank you. I'm not sure if you're finished yet, Trish. Sorry, I interjected on that.
No,
So, did you have anything to add on the status of discounts?
Oh, well, that was a big win, so it's probably worth mentioning. So as you can see, Rochelle wrote that, I think it was 41,000 or something.
Yes.
And this time last year, it was 176,000. I think that's, personally, that's down to the team, not 2020. Though 2020 has been wonderful, but that's hard work for the team and making sure that we get everything in.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to emphasise, just highlighting something. The team has worked very hard and has achieved, over a period of several weeks, they've consistently achieved 100% compliance with the 20-day statutory timeframes. And this is a direct result of that in terms of seeing discounts going right down. With the performance through February and the drop and the legacy cases, obviously it's going to take a while. There's a bit of a lag factor there. So if we consistently achieve the 100% over weeks and months going forward, that percentage is going to change over time. And as we get rid of the legacy cases, then clearly that's going to make a difference.
Trish, you wanted to
Well,
add?
through the chair, just also to thank you, Dean, and that's absolutely correct. And to make sure there's no new legacy ones. It's generally always the consultants now that we're finding are going over, not the internal team. They're absolutely fantastic. So it's quite tricky managing external consultants. Just getting you know.
Interesting. Oh, thank you for that. I'll open it up to questions. And Member Ward, you can go first.
Again, that was one of my questions, was how confident are your external consultants and how are they monitored? I have had personal experience actually of information going off to an external consultant and 10 questions coming back. I think 5 and 6 of those questions were actually answered within the material sent away. So I think there could probably be some sharpening of the pencils done there. And although the team has worked really, really hard to bring back the processing timeframes and the discounts applied to the consent of the processing, the consent processing, how much of this can we put down to Council Mark and the focus of the team to really work hard? Because I think to keep that performance level up could be very challenging, because history has proven that it hasn't been there. So I would just like to see that Council Mark level is held or improved upon. I think it's very easy to sort of focus on areas that we know we're not performing and to actually get a better score, but I would like to see that customer service level held up there as much as possible, if not improved upon. And tougher, not really a good word. I'd like to know why it wasn't tough in the first place, what you did to make it tougher, and how you educated and notified the public that you were going to make it tougher, so that the number of rejections could have been, I guess, reduced. So yeah, I just think if you're receiving information from applicants and also external planners submitting on their behalf, they notified that the system was going to get tougher, and what areas did you toughen up on? I'm not sure how I'm addressing here, Dean.
Madam Chair, I'll start answering it and I'll ask Trish to elaborate. We have a practitioners forum that we run 3 times a year. We invite planners to that. They don't all attend, consultant planners that is. We've got a process that Trish can comment on in terms of how we manage those external consultant planners, because clearly from a performance point of view, we want them to adhere to the 20-day time frame just like we do. So there's a performance element to that. In terms of the message of being tougher and maybe perhaps not having been tougher earlier, I think we were swamped with volumes of consents, probably thinking back 2 years now, when the team was really struggling. We were losing planners, they'd resigned and gone into the private sector to earn more, being offered more money. We just had vacancies and gaps in our capability. And there is a learning curve. Someone, I think Councillor Smith made the comment earlier on about bringing younger staff through. It takes time to grow and develop a planner to a level through the intermediate stages to senior and so on. So we have a team with a mix of experience, some more experienced planners and some not so experienced. And it takes time to develop that level of competence where you can actually consistently put out consents of a certain quality. And of course, there are easier consents and more complex ones, and they are allocated accordingly. I'll stop there because I think Tricia has had first-hand experience and could probably answer better than I can.
Through the chair. Oh no, you answered that extremely well. Experience me using the word tougher. I should say a higher bar to pass, or but Dean's absolutely correct. It was a result of the high volume of consents coming through. As we've often reported, we're running at higher than the 4-year average. So in actual fact, there was a period of time when there was only one team leader. They were only able to allocate after day 10. And day 10, you can't reject after day 10. So we were forced to accept subpar applications. There's nothing we can do about it. So I came on board and we just did a huge drive to turn things around, which we have.
Can I just add that it also came out of elected member appetite, that we reduced how much discounts, not us, but your team did that, because it was reported, I think, sometime last year or the year before how high it was, and everyone was like, what do we need to do? Please, you guys do it. And I wouldn't say that it was necessarily council mark that's lifted. It's the appetite from elected members and the community, and also our work plan. You prioritised, is it Vision 2020?
That's correct.
So it's constant. Even with the building consents, we're staying up there.
And the aim is, Madam Chair, just to elaborate, Council Mark has put us on a path of continuous improvement, and we certainly do that. And we want to meet our statutory timeframes. That's top of mind for us. We want to do that with building consents. We want to do the same with resource consents. It will be tough to maintain that standard, but that's our intent. And we need to pull all the strings in order to meet those objectives. So that's our intent, and we certainly are working. We are achieving it, but not fully. We are on our way.
Okay. Shall I go?
Oh, just through the chair, quickly, one quick sentence. Just also wanted to add, the chief manager, you're correct about council mark. It's actually the team itself. We are really dedicated professionals, and that's our job, is to meet the statutory timeframe. That's the core function of our job. If we don't do that, we're failing. So it was devastating for people to not meet statutory timeframes. Everybody works so hard in our team. I wish you could get a live feed camera and see how we work. So
I know how it works.
Thank you. Thank you, Trish. Did you have another question?
Just following on from that, I think the performance council mark side is one issue, but the tougher thing is a completely different issue. And there are examples out there in the community and people that have commented and come to me over the differences in using the same house plan on the same piece of land and replication a short time later on the same piece of land, and the differences in the levels of service and just how much tougher it has got, and the disgruntled customer feedback on why such a change when nothing had obviously changed. And I think that needs addressing, because at the end of the day, you don't just get tougher because you're processing better and operating better. It should be no bias, that each client is treated exactly the same and that they get that same level of service. And that hasn't been out here, so I'm hoping that will improve, with the new tightening up of. I mean, it is what it is, and and there has been a lot of talk in the community because we're going through such a growth phase and there's so many people building and so much happening at the moment that is a very hot topic out there in many communities as to that service side of it. And I fully understand that those same customers also want you to offer less discounts and pull more money back in because they're assuming that things might go down, which of course they never do. So
thank you, board. I appreciate your comments, and I'm sure that that feedback is being taken on board. Were there any other questions? Yes, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for that, Trish. My question again is around the resourcing side of things. So processing, Dr. Myberg, you mentioned before about maintaining that level of agility and responsiveness as we are in this uncertain time. What we're also hearing is that we do have a requirement to use a level of consultant planners because we just can't resource that in-house. So I guess my question is around that opportunity cost. Do we have an aspiration to reduce the use of consultants and process in-house, or does having that level of consultant availability ensure agility? And the direction that my question is coming from is when we talk about surrounding councils and we look at the way that we're working in other spaces with them, as we see some of these industries reduce in workforce and move into the private sector, are there opportunities there to be working more in alliance with our neighbouring councils to lever off that internal resource with an aspiration to reduce those consultant numbers, or is that something that's actually a really good opportunity for us to hold on to?
Madam Chair, I think there is certainly opportunity to do that, but I think each council is experiencing very similar volumes and constraints and challenges as we are. To work collaboratively, an example of that would be building consents and the opportunity to process consents for whangarei accounts. That's certainly an opportunity. The time frame for that we think is probably 2 years away. We want to get through another round of IANS audits, etc., and come through that well, and have a clearer assessment of our spare capacity that we have that we could offer externally. So the same principle holds for resource consents. We're using building consultants to augment what we have in the building team, consultant planners to augment what we have in the resource consents team. If and when there's a downturn in the future, we don't want to be in a position where we are staffed to the hilt and then are stuck with that cost and there's not enough volume coming through. So the balance of running and processing consents in-house and using consultant planners works well, and there's a note of caution there around how we do that, because we want to build our in-house capacity and optimize, but we also want to optimize the balance between in-house and what we can farm out externally.
That's great, thank you. So perhaps a secondary question, and touching on what Member Ward has raised and what you brought up, Trish, around if we are seeing trends with our consultant planners not meeting those timeframes and triggering those discounts, are there any mechanisms that could be put in place to reduce that, to shift those trends back? Thank you, through the Chair. Thank you, Councillor Smith. They were very astute questions. But this last question, I could talk longer and more at length about. It's just easy to say call them legacy, and most of them are consultants, but it's not purely because the consultant isn't meeting timeframes. A lot of it is to do with not getting it to them early enough. Decisions delegated authority doesn't have, there's only a couple of people signing off, so that can be a bottleneck. And now we've got the Northern Transportation Alliance, which sits outside of council, so we've got to wait for their timeframes. Our resourcing for engineers, like Dan said, so it's actually not, there's only been a few times, and I can pinpoint that it's literally the consultants have been at fault, and every time I've got them to reduce their invoice to match the discount. So, but in terms of the earlier question, how Dan said you don't want to over-resource and then hit a downturn, but we do need to do a business case perhaps to see how we can if we could better resource ourselves, because we are cost recoverable. We don't use ratepayers' money for FTEs, so if there was a appetite to look at increasing staff, especially engineers, like Dean said earlier, and planning support staff, because that's the crux of of managing the consultants, is having the planning support staff.
Great response. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any further questions? No. I just want to commend the report writer and yourself, Trish. The wards, having the breakdown by ward to help members see where the volume of consents are coming from across our district. And it's the report, every time it comes to us, it's got new information in it. It's really, really valuable. That's all I needed to add. And, oh yes,
Sorry to add one more point, but Rochelle was here, she might phrase it herself. We are going through a change in the way we report.
Yeah.
We're trying to keep the graphs as accurate as we can, but we're changing from info Q&A to BI. So it's just matching up the data. So if you do see some inconsistencies, it's only because of the way that different consents are calculated. Does that make sense?
Yep. Awesome. Thank you for that. Can you...
Just wondering, are we likely to see a spike? Are we seeing an increase due to the district plan coming along, the review?
Short answer, Madam Chair, is yes. And the extent of it, we're not sure of, but it will depend ultimately on how much change there is to the district plan and how enabling it is, and what that then means as a flow-on effect and consents coming through the door. But yes, it certainly will be a challenge to us, because it's likely to open up all kinds of new considerations that add complexity, potentially lengthen the time frame for considering each consent, which Trish mentioned before. So yeah.
Especially with the status of our development contributions policy.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to put the item to the vote. All those in favour? Aye. Thank you very much. So, Trish, thank you so much for your time. I think that's
Thank you, councillors, and thank you, Chief Executive, and thank you, staff.
And make sure you work really hard in your learning and professional development at the Planning Institute conference.
I will.
Oh, have a good time. Say hello to Councillor Boyd for us.
Yes.
Don't miss the flight.
No,
we'll let you go now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trish.
Okay, I think that brings our meeting to a close. But I am... Yes, Dean was just going to give us an update on the pound before we close.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Both animal shelters. The northern shelter is well underway. There are some pictures there. Can you get those in a people?
Okay.
The project is well underway. We're looking to, this is the update from the project manager, Catherine Lee, and Andy's team. Northern shelter, this was a February report, so it's probably more advanced than what we see in photographs. But we do see good progress. We're aiming for a completion finish date in June. Cutting of ribbons and big celebration of a new animal management facility in the far north, in the far north, up in Kataia. It's a $1.5 million cost, and the other project, which is the southern facility, will get underway. Tenders awarded, project underway next financial year, July. And we're looking to build a slightly different facility, which will have an educational component to it, a rehoming component, And there'll be some movement between the facility you see there, being completed at the moment in the north, and the southern facility. So with the provincial growth unit funding of $1 million, we're now able to deliver 2 facilities, one in the north, one on the screen, and another one in the south, and they'll work in a complementary way and service the district very well, we believe. Without the provincial growth unit funding, we would have struggled. What we're looking at there is a total cost when complete of $1.5 million. We had $1.9 million, and $400,000 was not going to build us a facility in the south. Our initial estimates were to upgrade the existing kennels at Melka to the animal management, animal welfare standards, was estimated at 200,000. After quantity surveyors costs, it came back at 600. And that led us to come back to council and make the recommendation for removal of what's on site and the build with this additional $1 million at our disposal. $1.4 million will be the cost of the southern facility. So things are tracking well. There are some geotechnical reports and consenting and other matters relating to the southern shelter that are being worked through, and that explains why there's a slight delay. And then, of course, getting the house and the office that were on site, moving those off site. There's a lot of interest. It's out to tender at the moment. A lot of interest in purchasing and putting in tenders for those two, the house and the office. And the tender runs through to the end of this month. So we'll soon see a clear site, and then the further preparatory work can be done for the southern shelter. I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Smith?
Thank you for that, Dr. Myberg. The tender runs through to the end of this month. What are the next milestone timeframes from that, with the anticipation of moving them off, and what sort of timeframe?
The timeframe is to get them off as soon as possible. That's part of the tender process. And while there's a lot of interest, in acquiring the house and the office, we wanted it all moved off within 30 days. So when the tender closes at the end of this month, next week, we'll then know with some certainty, one, that we will have a clear site, and by when, and then the geotech reports are running in parallel, and there'll be further project updates through the infrastructure committee. That's where all the detail, I think, will be provided.
Okay. What sort of final delivery time are we looking at for the northern?
Talking at the northern, built by June.
Built by June?
Yes.
And the southern?
Southern will take probably closer towards the summer months. It depends on the award of tender and start date, and obviously we have to secure someone to build the facility, and that will extend probably into the spring time. Yeah, September, October.
That's great, thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay, thank you very much for that update. I'm going to close our meeting now, and you can. Yes, before I do.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I gave you a summary earlier of all those points that were raised after the last committee meeting. There was a workshop where you as a committee asked us to provide further reports on a whole bunch of different things. There were 15 different types of report or further information requests. We are incorporating that into a work program, and we will endeavour to have that as an update of a work program, inclusive of all of those requests that you put our way at the next committee meeting on the 4th of May.
Excellent. Thank you. Now I'm going to close our meeting. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te atawhaia tō tātou ariki, o ihi karaiti, me te aroha, me te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu. Ake, amen.
Casey, would you end the live stream, please?